thank you very much for inviting us today to speak about some different aspects of geoscience careers. Personally, I've been very fortunate to spend my career up to now working at the Council for Geoscience, and this is my 15th year there since my honours in 2006. Geology is, of course, very versatile, as you all know, and at undergraduate level and even in honours, you were probably exposed to many aspects of this field, but maybe not necessarily marine geoscience, because it's generally not taught at undergraduate level in South Africa, and also because it's kind of an emerging field, I would say, in South Africa, despite the fact that it's been around for a long time and happening quietly in the background for a long time too. I almost always show this map that's on the cover slide. It was revealed to the world in 1977, and it was put together by a remarkable woman called Marie Tharp, who produced this first map of the seafloor. There are two things, though, that I want to mention about it. And one of them is that up to this point, the seafloor was thought to be relatively flat, which is very obviously not. And the other thing, which is possibly even more striking, is that the way we view the topography or the morphology of the seafloor right now is not terribly different to what was first presented about 50 years ago. So unbelievably, almost just about every expedition to the deep seabed, especially biological expeditions, discover a new species to science. And even in shallow water, almost every geoscience mapping expedition discovers brand new features on the seafloor. It's a very exciting space at the moment with better technologies to be able to map it. So you all know that we live on the blue planet and the ocean dominates the Earth, covering most of its surface and actually it's the driving force behind climate change, weather, all sorts of external forces. More has been learned about the sea in the past half century than it has in all preceding history, from seismic activity to tectonic plate shifts. The existence of hydrothermal vents was a really exciting discovery, and particularly in microbes that powerfully shape natural systems. I mentioned earlier that the seafloor is very sort of poorly mapped in high resolution. And in fact, what's quite amazing is that the surfaces of the moon and Mars are better mapped right now than our own seabed. In South Africa, our offshore territory is actually larger than the onshore territory as part of our exclusive economic zone. And I've only shown the bits around the mainland here, not off the islands down in the Southwest Indian Ocean. This will be more than doubled if our application for an extended shelf claim is endorsed by the UN. In South Africa, we have a lengthy history of marine geoscience, and in the 1960s, the first reconnaissance mapping program began, culminating in some of these maps, such as the ones shown on the right. So within marine geology, it could further be divided into sub-aspects of this, like geophysics, geochemistry, sedimentology, paleontology, like micropaleontology is really important. And limited visibility through seawater, rarely more than about 30 meters or so, was the key to the development of this field. Whales and dolphins have overcome the problem of sort of seeing through water by using sophisticated sonar techniques. And as of the years following World War II, so have humans. We've kind of adapted sonar to be able to map the seafloor, either looking forward or looking down to the sea bottom. So how we map the seafloor, at the moment, there are no remote sensing techniques that are able to see through the water column from space, because electromagnetic waves become highly attenuated when they travel through seawater. So we still have to mount systems on a boat and steam up and down, generally in fairly straight profiles. And we call it mowing the lawn. It's almost like producing a painting. At the Council for Geoscience, we have 5 different instruments that we use to map the seafloor. And these examples shown here are a multi-beam echo sounder that gives a really high resolution 3-dimensional morphology map, or a side scan sonar that's almost like an aerial photograph. It's flat and has differences in texture that are picked up. Some kinds of data sets that you can process and produce from collecting these sorts of data are, we can see scaffolding, ladders, tires, all sorts of funny human objects that end up on the seabed. We can map those with these ultra high resolution systems. And of course, geological structures. There's some beautiful images of granite shown up there, dolosa. And then on the far left are some examples of places where we've mapped with multi-beam bathymetry and then followed up with scuba diving to ground truth them. Shipwrecks are pretty common, especially around the Cape of Storms. And the one shown in the bottom right is in Hout Bay. Another type of hydroacoustic data that we use at the CGS to map our South African seafloor specifically they're shallow penetrating seismic systems. So they're based on the same principles as airgun that is used in the oil and gas industry, for example, but these are on completely different frequencies. They also use sonar, and they also emit pulses that travel through the water column. But then in this case, instead of with bathymetric systems that are bounced off or reflected off to give you a depth, these actually penetrate through the layers of the seafloor. And it's almost like cutting a slice of cake through the seabed and seeing what exactly is there and how it was made up. These profiles, in conjunction with the high-resolution surface mapping, are excellent ways of getting a good idea of what has happened in the geological past. We often have to ground truth what we've mapped with geophysics, and we do this in different ways. One of them is taking sediment grab samples from a boat. Another is by dredging, which is rarely used in South Africa, partly because we don't have the vessels and equipment to do it, and partly also because it's quite a destructive technique. And we do, in the CGS, we're qualified commercial divers as well, and we do some scuba diving to map and sample geological structures and features on the seafloor. In this case, I've shown some Pleistocene rocks that we were hammering off to have dated using luminescence dating. We dive up to about 50 meters. Often the conditions are not great, because often where you've got good geology, you don't necessarily have nice diving conditions. And sometimes we have to take some unusual precautions, like in Mossel Bay, for example, where there's a large population of great white sharks. We've got to always consider safety and responsibility. A great way of sampling the seabed is through coring. And coring is usually done off large research vessels, such as the Meteor that's shown here. It's always a real special treat to have an opportunity to go out on a research vessel and work on these bilateral projects, or sometimes multilateral projects. And in this case, we were studying past climate archives by coring the seafloor around the whole South African margin. So this is essentially poking a hole in the seafloor and extracting some of those layers of sediment, which we've probably first mapped out using some shallow seismics, and then detecting and unraveling the changes in conditions over time, and what that means for global climate or the buildup or destruction of ice sheets. As we see evidence of that all over the world, even if you're far afield from the ice sheets. So it's all very interesting from a scientific perspective, but it's also pretty relevant at the moment in the context of a few things. There's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Several of them focus on marine-related topics. There's right now, since 2021, we're in the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science, which have this wonderful slogan of the science we need for the ocean we want. Right here in South Africa, we have the National Development Plan, which is running until 2030 in the first phase. And a lot of that depends on food security, climate change, and issues that are relevant to marine sciences. Of course, there's also Pakisa Oceans Economy, which aims to unlock the blue economy surrounding our coastline. And also, most tangibly to us, it's important right now because there's massive development along coasts. And to put it quite plainly, too many people probably live too close to the coast. Sea level is rising, and I'll get back to that a little bit later. But in order to understand the magnitude and the rates of these rise, we have to look at past records, and most of them right now are below the sea. So what I specifically do, or the things I spend my time on, I work on a different range of things, and any day is of course pretty varied. Sometimes if you're out in the field, that's always the most fun. Possibly the least fun is doing admin, which is really important to support projects that are running. Some of the longest projects I've worked on and I'm still working on have been going for 10 years. And others just, of course, are a few minute tasks. So completely variable, like I mentioned. So some of the things that I right now am doing, we do field surveys, which is offshore mapping. Firstly, you've got to set up these instruments, understand them pretty well, then go out and collect the data, and then spend a lot of time processing and interpreting the data sets. And that's probably the most important part. I mentioned before that we do multi-beam, side-scan sonar, shallow sub-bottom profiling, and also marine magnetics. But there are other types of marine data as well that are collected around the world, like gravity, for instance. We also do coastal mapping and coring, which is sometimes scuba diving or grab sampling, the things that I mentioned already. My research interests are within sea level change, mostly. A lot of what I do comes back to that. And coastal paleoscience, which is looking at submerged landscapes because sea level changes constantly. And ancient human use of coasts, so our early ancestors and how they were using this now submerged continental shelf. I work on paleoclimates and paleo environments, and with colleagues from other disciplines, we reconstruct extinct ecosystems. I do some geoarchaeology as well, which is linking high resolution archaeological deposits to sort of broader landscape questions. And I supervise students that are at Nelson Mandela University because that's where I have a link. I'm on the South African delegation for the International Seabed Authority, which is a United Nations project to add to the United Nations Convention the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Quite a mouthful, it's UNCLOS. So there's going to be another addendum that includes deep seabed mining, which is quite futuristic right now, probably based on technologies that don't yet exist, working in the most challenging environments on the planet. And needing to do it in a sustainable way. So that's really fascinating and important at the moment. Locally, I work on the steering committee for the Extended Shelf Claim project, where we're trying to increase our offshore space. And I'm on several other forums, like the Marine Mining Forum, where we're also trying to develop legislation to protect our seafloor. And I'm working more in sort of science-informed policy, especially in past climate change and anticipated future change. In the Council for Geoscience, I do quite a lot of strategy, for example, within the Marine Geoscience program that I lead. And we're always writing proposals for funding. And like Joseph also mentioned, we write a lot of reports. So that's something one has to become quite comfortable with. I do quite a lot of presentations on different aspects of our work. This is important to communicate science, and people are really interested in knowing about what we do. So I think a lot of what should drive our research is also being able to put it out on public platforms. Some of my friends and I are making comics for kids, which we think is really fun, and we're hoping to instill some more interest in STEM subjects at school level. I'm involved in geoheritage, and I do some of the drawings for the GSSA boards around the Western Cape, and also help with some exhibitions in museums. So how I got there, basically I love rocks and I love the ocean, and I grew up on a coast, and I definitely didn't want to move inland, especially to a mine. So that's how I sort of found my way. I'm also very curious to know what we don't know, and the seafloor is full of that. I had a CGS bursary in my honours year, which is what allowed me to then work in the system, and I've never left. I've had several positions, I think 5 since then. And yeah, I've very much enjoyed my research career there. At the time, I need to thank several people. So in those years, there wasn't really as much use of the internet, and we had to build connections. And I want to get back to that later, that's really important. So because of 3 people, who are Ron Yukin, Rio Luigi, and Charles Bosman, we were exposed to some of what the Marine Geoscience Unit was doing and able to apply for bursaries. And that's how we sort of learned about this and got into these systems. And the most fun part of my job so far has been the discovery of new things, especially areas that people have never seen before. So some of these topics that I touched on now, I'm going to build on in a little bit of detail to give examples of what sorts of things you might end up researching or working on, even in a corporate world. One of them is climate change. So sea levels change constantly and global climates shift constantly, especially in accordance with glacial, interglacial, or ice age types of cycles. I've shown here the areas of the world in red that are exposed as landscapes when sea levels are low during ice ages. And a lot of this submerged landscape territory is very important for unraveling past changes and then projecting forward. A sea level curve from 400,000 years ago to the present shows just how unstable the sea level really is. It goes from about a maximum elevation of approximately 10 meters above present to about 130 meters below present. So of course, the 10 meters above present, worst case scenario periods of warming are what we're concerned about right now, future climate change and sea level rise, which is a direct consequence of that. Whether or not humans have caused these changes are completely different questions, but certainly it's part of a broader natural cycle. When sea levels change, geological deposits are left behind on the continental shelf. So for example, beaches, dunes, rivers, wetlands, they all migrate out, and sometimes they become preserved. And we can sample them and date them and figure out how quickly sea level has fluctuated in the past and what caused, for example, the rocks to cement or to form, what that means for the environment at the time. On top of that, in South Africa, we have one of the richest Middle Stone Age archaeological records anywhere on Earth. And here, in fact, at the moment, the Cape South Coast sites are pointing towards this might have been the area for our progenitor population of Homo sapiens, which is, of course, incredibly important to everyone on Earth. What's quite interesting about these sites is that they have large hiatuses from when people left those coastal caves, which are now on the coast, and probably lived on the continental shelf. So working with archaeologists and paleoanthropologists for years, I've been mapping parts of the seafloor to try and understand how humans could have used this environment and what it means in that context. We've mapped out, I showed some interesting features earlier, like ladders and tires, but also from a geological point of view, we've mapped out plenty areas with submerged sea cliffs and caves, so incised river channels, ancient coasts like beaches and dunes. And we're always correlating what we see offshore to what's preserved along the modern day coast. For instance, there are footprints preserved in rocks that are direct links to people and animals moving across these ancient landscapes. We're also working up in Mpondoland on the east coast, where we have an extremely narrow continental shelf, also showing submerged features of submerged landscapes, but with a very different expression to the Cape. Here we are working at Waterfall Bluff in an archaeological site and all along the Mpondoland coast, and are sort of constraining these land-sea connections through time. This comes into, again, climate, environment, people's experience of changing landscapes, etc. And we've been working a lot with local students and local scientists, so there's always a lot of collaboration. At the Council for Geoscience, we're busy with an offshore mapping program that ultimately aims to remap our entire seabed area in high resolution. I've shown Robben Island and Table Bay here. And if you zoom into the data, you can see isocliner folds, faults, dikes, shipwrecks, all sorts of interesting things. We're also monitoring sediment movements around, especially on the Cape Peninsula, how the beaches are eroded or nourished, and is it seasonal or is it because of development? That sort of work is ongoing, as well as making seamless onshore, offshore geological maps. We have a lot of fun while we're out on the water. And here I've shown some of our colleagues and interns, and it's all part of the Geoscience program to map the offshore territory, to train young scientists and to instill an interest in this environment. So our mapping program aims to what we call producing the real map of South Africa in ultra high resolution that includes these offshore areas. So just to start sort of summing up all of this, of course, to do marine geology, you need a degree in geology or geophysics, or even oceanography with some geology mixed in with that. And you can study geoscience at most universities across South Africa. People generally get into this a little bit later on, so in sort of postgrad level. Some of the universities that offer marine geoscience specifically are the University of the Western Cape with an oil and gas focus, at Nelson Mandela University with the Ocean Science Campus, at UKZN, and at CPUT, where they've got a lot of equipment development in oceanography. Different sectors that you might end up working in are the oil and gas industry, which I'm not mentioning too much about here, shallow seafloor and coastal mining, exploration on the shelf or in the deep environment, hydrographic surveying, and renewable energy, though this is not so big yet in South Africa. Other areas that people are quite interested in right now are in data analytics or coding. I had a PhD student called Talisha Pillay who's just come up with the first algorithm to do this in South Africa, to map benthic habitats using machine learning and AI. And it's something that's becoming a lot more important in our work. But I do want to stress, though, that if you want to go into data analytics, it's important to link it with something else, like a sort of geoscience topic. And then robotics and survey technologies, oceanography, just getting down to these deep environments and being able to map the seafloor more efficiently. Those are huge right now. In mining and exploration, I mentioned the International Seabed Authority earlier. The deep sea floor is being considered for eventual deep seabed mining. And there's a lot of legislation around this. There's technological design, there's actual mapping and exploration, there's sampling. There are a lot of opportunities around the world right now. In academia, of course, museums, scientific publishing and editing, that's also another thing that anyone with a good geoscience background can get into. And then if you're interested in working for government, you can get into policy development, climate change projections, marine spatial planning, which is defining how to use different areas of the seabed, and coming up with defining marine protected areas. Some tips I've put up here. Some of them are pretty broad to most sort of young students or young graduates. Firstly, you need to like the sea to do marine geoscience. It doesn't matter if you get seasick, most of us sometimes do, but just like that environment is the first thing. Realize that you'll spend most of your time on a computer and not necessarily on the water. Always be curious and observant, and get out there and look at rocks, even if you just put on your shoes and walk along coasts or anywhere around your area. No online learning can supplement that. When you get into marine geoscience, it's important to learn to collect your own data. That will teach you a hell of a lot about electronics and all sorts of other things. You require a wide range of skills, like any discipline. And then I think importantly, use Zoom and make use of these opportunities that have come from COVID to attend a lot of online conferences, lectures, seminars, talk to people and see what other people are doing. That'll take you a long way. It'll also set up connections that will become very important later. If you're considering a PhD, I would say if you like research and you want a research career, then you'll probably have to do that. But there are a lot of jobs that do not require having a PhD. And also, whatever it is that you end up focusing on or specializing in, you might not necessarily know that yet. And an opportunity might just pop up that presents you with something that you take on. So keep a lookout for those. I've put on some links if you want to take notes of things to read up on, like Seabed 2030. The Nippon Foundation offers a lot of scholarships. If you want to read about the UN Decade of Ocean Science, the website is there. Likewise, the International Seabed Authority, there are a lot of training opportunities for graduates, especially from sort of developing countries. So Southern Africans are very eligible for these. At the CGS, we have a website with a page for vacancies, and you can ask to stay updated and be informed when these come up. Internships advertised there when they're available. And then we also have a bursary program, and those are advertised through the website as well. So I've put up some information here, but there are contact details and there'll be info on the website in due course. And if you want to ask anything about marine geoscience, you're welcome to email me. My email address is at the top. Thanks very much.